Good morning, Farmington High School. This is Mr. Hooper speaking. This is Unit 5, Note 4, Solving Quadratics. So a lot of you are coming from either right from Intermediate Algebra A, or maybe you had a trimester off. All right? A couple things you need to remember. A, I'm not going to do the problem right every time. All right? I want you to identify mistakes. The second thing would be to remember to pause the video if I'm talking too fast or I'm writing too fast so that you can catch up. And then C, the most important part of it would be that you need to listen to the videos. Alright, I'm intentionally not going to show you what to do. I'm going to tell you and see if you can pick it up on your own. So, learning target. I can choose an appropriate method to solve a quadratic. So, in your toolbox, you should have two ways of doing this, solving quadratics. There are three methods to solving quadratics. Graphing to find the x-intercepts, so that you would have to graph. A lot of people don't like to graph, especially when these equations are x squared minus x's plus a constant of some sort. Factoring and using the zero product property. Alright, so this is going to be where we have the a times the c value, and this is multiplying on top. The b value goes on the bottom, and it's adding. And then you pick the two factors that multiply together to get the top and add together to get the bottom. Then 3 is the quadratic. All right, you got to know how to substitute variables in, and you have to know how to square root, plus or minus, things like that. So factoring didn't work. All right, so when we don't have a factoring that didn't work, all right, then we have to do the quadratic equation. So this is when you do the quadratic equation now, right? Basically, you might have some decimals, something of that nature. Got a negative under the radical in the quadratic formula. So if we go back, if you get a negative under here and you're trying to take a square root of that, in your calculator it's going to say error. So what that means to us is that there's no solution, right? There's no combination of decimals or anything that would work out to give us an answer. So then it's going to be no solution. So these are your problem-solving things, all right? Hey, I can't factor it, all right? I need to try quadratic, all right? Quadratic doesn't work, then it's going to be no solution. That's why we like quadratic, because it works every single time if there is an actual answer. So, solving using the zero product property. How this works, right? I have a 1 times a 20, so I have a 20 on top. I have a 9x, so a 9 there. That is going to be 4 and 5. What I do is I replace the middle term with the 4 and 5. So I'm replacing the 9. So I have x squared plus 4x plus 5x plus 20. So what I did is I took 3 terms that I was given, and I made it 4, so that I can factor by grouping. Alright, we have some common. The GCF in the front is x, the GCF in the second one is 5. Alright, this still equals 0 technically. If I take an x out, 2 minus 1 cancels, I have an x still. These x's cancel, x plus 4 plus 5. 5's cancel, x plus 4 equals 0. Right, now since these are out front and the x plus 4s are the same, then you get to rewrite it as x plus 5 times x plus 4 equals 0, because we know that box method would still work. Right, and then we do x plus 5. We have two scenarios. This is the zero product property, but you need to know that you have x plus 5 could equal 0, or you have x plus 4 equals 0. I would subtract 5 to get x by itself, subtract 5, x could equal negative 5. Or I could subtract 4, I'd have x equals negative 4. So that's what that looks like. You have two answers there. A lot of people will rewrite it as x equals negative 4, comma, negative 5. Alright. That's all that. Now if I scroll back up here a little bit, solving using the quadratic. So then solving using that quadratic, a equals 1, b equals 9, c equals 20. My formula is -9 plus or minus the square root, 9 squared, b squared, minus 4 times a, so 1 times the c, which is 20. All divided by 2 times 1, or 2 times a. Then I'm pretty good at writing -9 plus or minus. What I usually do is do 9 squared, which is 81. I see that 4, 1, and 20 are all positive, so I just leave it at minus sign. 4 times 1 is 4 times 20 is 80. All of this divided by 2. I need some room here. So then I'd have -9 plus or minus the square root of 1 over 2. Square root of 1 is 1. So you'd have -9 plus or minus 1 equals 2. Notice I did everything under the square root first before I did anything with the plus or minus. So now that the square root's gone, now I'll plus or minus. -9 plus 1 divided by 2 is going to be -8 over 2, which is -4. -9 minus 1 over 2 would be -10 over 2, which is -5. I ran out of room and I don't want to move it. So, should see, this answer is the same as these two. And remember that quadratic formula always works. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to start simplifying and going a little bit faster, so pay attention. Now, also, remember, this point down here is the vertex. Right? That's what it means to be a vertex. Your -4 answer and your -5 were the values where it equaled 0. Sometimes you'll see f of x equals x squared plus 9x plus 20. Sometimes you'll see y equals x squared plus 9x plus 20. There's many ways to write this, but if you took this equals 0 part, if y equals 0 is what you're always looking for. So this is the y-intercept, y equals 0 along the whole x-axis. So you're seeing where it crosses the x-axis. Don't forget that. That's going to become important later. Make sure you understand the vertex too, and we'll talk about finding that in a little bit. So I look at this one. -24 times 1 is -24. Don't forget this is a 1 here. This would be a 10. I'm going to get a negative. So I know that 10 is positive, so I'm going to go with 12 and a -2. Alright, then this is going to work out that it's x squared plus 12x minus 2x minus 24 equals 0. If I group this, this is x, GCF. This one is a little bit trickier. It's -2 and -2. So don't forget, this would have been x times x plus 12 minus 2. Alright, because then these cancel. That would make that a positive x. This would become a negative, and a negative is a positive 12. So I knew to get rid of that -2 because then it's going to make us both x plus 12s here. X minus 2, x plus 12 equals 0. So I get x minus 2 equals 0, so you add the 2, you're going to get x equals 2. And then x plus 12 equals 0. Subtract the 12, subtract the 12, x equals -12. So x equals -12, comma 2. Now, great news for you. Okay, look at these ones. 12 at -2. Don't tell Miss Johnson or Humbert I showed this, or Beckman, I mean. Alright, look at this. X minus 2, x plus 12. Alright, some of this grouping stuff you really need to know how to do, because when the coefficient in front of the x squared is 1, these values are what you're going to end up with right here, what I got underlined in black. Now, if the GCF, or the coefficient here is 2, then you have to work through all of this grouping stuff. So it's good to know how to group, but when the GCF is 1, you're going to get those factors like that. That's why we think factoring is so much easier. Now, on the other side of things, you could still just do the quadratic formula, where A equals 1, B equals 10, C equals negative 24. Now, when that works out, you have a negative 10 plus or minus square root. I would have said 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times a negative 24 divided by 2 times 1. I would add negative 10 plus or minus. What I do is I do 10 squared is 100. Now, if you look closely, you have 1, 2. Okay? You are going to end up with a plus. So I figure out if it's minus or plus first, and then I would use my calculator, do 4 times 1 times 24. You get 96. All divided by 2. Well, since I'm good at math and blah, 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 negative 10 plus or minus 196 is the square root of 196. So the square root 196 is going to equal 14. So then I have plus or minus 14, all divided by 2, extendo pago, negative 10 plus 14 divided by 2, all right? That is going to end up being 4 divided by 2, which is 2. Then you're going to have negative 10 minus 14 divided by 2. It's going to be negative 24 divided by 2 is negative 12. Hey, look at that. I still haven't made a mistake. All right, but you should see these are the same. All right. You have to decide what you're good at. If you're really bad at factoring, challenge yourself to do it. All right, because you're going to need factoring in other units, especially Unit 9. Now, quadratic formula, as far as answers go, and as far as things you want to be able to do on your ACT test, I would go with quadratic formula. You can see, look at here. This is negative 12 there. This is supposed to be 2 there. All right, your vertex is way down here, so that's why it's going to be important to be able to graph these. That's all you're doing in Algebra 2. All right, so like I kind of told you before, now this G coefficient here is 2. Now you're going to have to know how to group and factor. All right, I would pause this video. I would try these problems, this problem, doing it both ways myself, and then I would watch it. So make sure you're using good note skills and good video skills and know what we're doing. So that 2 times a negative 4 is a negative 8. And then this is a positive 3. Alright, so if I know the factors of 8, I know it's 1 and 8, 2 and 4. Alright, I can tell you right now that I have no idea how to do this one by factoring. Right? There's no way if you add 2 and 4, you get 6. If you subtract them, you get 2. If you add these together, you get 9. If you subtract them, you get 7. Right? There's no combination that's going to work here. Great news. We have a little tool that we can use called the quadratic formula. So I would have did negative 3 plus or minus the square root. 3 squared minus 4. Right, now we got times it by the A, which is 2, times it by the C, which is negative 4. Right, that all is going to be divided by 2 times A, which is 2. So just because you can't factor it doesn't mean you don't know what's going on or you got to get frustrated or anything like that. Right, you need to be confident in your abilities. So right here, I'm looking at that. I can't factor it. I don't have any clue what to do there. I'm going to go to my quadratic formula. All right. 3 squared is 9. Remember, I told you this negative and this negative. I shouldn't have used blue, but here they are, 2 negatives. Right? That's going to become a positive. Now, I tried to scribble out a 4 and a 2, so 4 times 2 is 8. Times 4 is 32. Divided by 4. Now, moving down here, I'm going to have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 4. So this is an example where I probably did the right thing, because I know that since I got a decimal, I was never going to be able to factor that. So I'm just going to come over here. I got more space. Negative 3 plus or minus, when I do this in a calculator, I get 6.40. Alright? So I would probably always go to, let's go to 3 decimals. I think Miss Johnson and Miss Beckman told you to round to the hundredths place. So usually what I do here is I leave 3 decimals to the thousands, because then I'm going to use the thousandths in my final answer. So what I would do is negative 3 plus 6.403 divided by 4, or negative 3 minus 6.403 divided by 4. You're going to have 3.403 divided by 4. And what I would do is I would get an answer of 0.85. So this one has a 0.850, so then I'm going to round that to a hundredths place. Then if I have negative 3 and I subtract 6.403, you're going to have negative 9.403. And then when you divide it by 4, it's pretty easy to see that your next decimal is going to be equal to negative 2.35. So now I rounded to the hundredths place. Notice that. 2 decimals, 2 decimals. So leaving the 3 allowed me to round to 2. So that's a good skill to have moving forward in math. Leaving 1 extra decimal just so that you can round correctly at the end. Alright, so if you struggled with that, make sure you ask some questions. So you see this graph, alright, so we had like negative 2.35, that's about there, and about 3.5 there. These are going to be awesome problems moving forward. So the FHS Physics Department is having a pumpkin flinging contest out on the football field for Halloween. One team's pumpkin has a directory that can be traced by the function negative 16t squared plus 7t squared. Pick a method and find how long it takes that team's pumpkin to hit the ground. Alright, so everybody loves these problems because they're funny, and because when it hits the ground, the height is always equal to 0. So in a sense, we're just writing 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 72t. Great news for us. These ones are actually pretty easy. It's because this one has a GCF. So remember that grouping stuff? GCF there is t. 72, I know, can be divided by 8. So I would have said 8t. When I do that, this is 0 equals 8t. And then in parentheses, I would have negative 2t plus 9. See how these t's cancel? Now, this is a scenario just like the zero product property, where either 0 equals 8t or 0 equals negative 2t plus 9. When you do that, you can divide by 8 on both sides, and 0 equals t. And then you can add 2t is usually what I do, because I don't like that variable to be negative. Because then I'm going to have 2t equals to the remaining 9. You divide by 2, and t equals, we'll say 4.5. Now, this makes complete sense every single time I see this problem, because you started at t equals 0. That's when the pumpkin was released. It started at the ground, then they flung it in the air. Then it lands at t equals 4.5. That's your notes video for today. So remember some of those note-taking skills where you pause the video, you think about what's going on, you try problems before I do it. And then whenever there's a mistake, don't doubt yourself. Alright? Ask me. Stop the notes video. Come talk to me. Ask a question the next day. Circle it. Alright? You have to improve as an independent learner, and I'm here to help. Thanks for listening.